Hi, so I'm dressed as a cowboy, and that's because I'm going to talk about a book called Blood Meridian. So, Blood Meridian is a Western book by Cormac McCarthy. And what I want to talk about is how a lot of people say that this book is anti racist. Um, in my opinion, the book is not anti racist, it's just racist. So, when people say that this book is anti racist, they say it is because it's exaggerated, and because of this exaggeration, the reader is meant to understand that Cormac is not serious and he's parodying the Western genre. He's parodying how it perpetuates a lot of untrue stereotypes. And I feel like, personally, this doesn't make any sense. I feel like no one really understands that. You can't just exaggerate something about a genre and expect people to understand that you're really making fun of this genre and you're trying to expose everything that's false about this genre. Say, as a metaphor, take heavy metal music. You take a band like Judas Priest, which started heavy metal music, where they had lyrically, kind of edgy lyrics talking about violence. And later on, you have extreme metal that comes out. You have bands like Cannibal Corpse, where their album covers are scenes where like babies are hanging from butcher hooks, and like the lyrics are talking about violent, brutal murder. Cannibal Corpse doesn't read as a satirical band to me. It's not trying to expose the heavy metal genre. Cannibal Corpse is not trying to expose how overly violent heavy metal is and why that's a bad thing. Cannibal Corpse is just doing its own thing. It took the heavy metal genre and it turned it up to 11, much like Blood Meridian. But it's a very good book. So that's the thing. I feel like the reason why a lot of people say that Blood Meridian is anti-racist is because the book is legitimately good. The prose is really good. The narrative is captivating. The descriptions are very interesting. It has this very cool, grim, dark feel. It has very interesting symbolism, which I'll get into a bit later. And I feel like the reason why people call the book anti-racist is because they want to be woke and justify that they like this book. And I feel like that is bad. I feel like if a book is racist, there are scenes where it still perpetuates all those negative stereotypes that the Western genre is known to do. For example, like, it doesn't really represent Native people as people. They're more just like hostile enemy NPCs in a wild land. Like, the Mexican people are represented as being very uncivilized, as living in like very crappy mud dwellings. There's a scene, and there's many problematic scenes. And one of them is when a group is attacked by a group of indigenous people. I think Apaches. And one of the warriors gets off his horse and starts ass raping one of the wounded white men. So yeah, a bit problematic, a bit of an exaggeration maybe. I feel like for a book, a Western, to be anti-racist, you can't just exaggerate all the aspects of the Western genre. You would have to do something different that would kind of counteract all of these negative things, if that makes sense. So, like, you can still have fights between cowboys and Indians, but I feel like the nature of the book would have to be different. It can't just be a book like Blood Meridian where the camera, if you will, is following a group of white people. You would have to have scenes kind of like in the style of A Song of Ice and Fire or Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere books, where the point of view changes between the different chapters. So you would have to have chapters that follow some indigenous characters, right? Where, like, they're at the village and it shows that they are normal. They're also human and they have logical human desires, wants, and flaws. And as well, there'd be some representation of their society outside of just being bands of warriors. So you would see like children and women characters and them like doing stuff that is not related to war. And that's not here in this book. So another thing I think this book does is it perpetuates a false equivalency, where you see, for example, the Glanton gang butchering entire villages of Indians or Mexicans, but you also see white or Mexican settlements that have been clearly raided by indigenous people, and then you see piles of bodies like, butchered and like maimed and stuff. So I feel like that perpetuates the idea that, and the whole idea that this book is building at is that the Wild West at this time is just a very wild, for lack of a better word, place where atrocities are committed on both sides, and it's a very complicated situation. Like all this violence happens, no one really has a good explanation for why. Everyone is kind of numb to it. And I feel like that is just like a bad explanation of the situation. It doesn't explain the situation, because to some degree that is true, but also it doesn't really explain the context of that. It doesn't really explain that, like, you know, like ultimately a short while ago these lands were not being colonized by the Mexicans and Americans, and it's because of this colonization that all of this violence is happening. Another thing is that in this book there's a character called the Judge. When you first start reading the book, he seems to be a representation of the devil. He is he is a supernatural being. He has insane stats. He has a crazy amount of knowledge when it comes to everything, chemistry, law. He is very quick, he is very witty, he is very strong. He's also evil. One of the first scenes we see him is he convinces a group of people that their preacher is an imposter and then they kill him. He does that for no reason. There's also many scenes where he molests and kills children. So throughout the book, he saves the Glanton gang multiple times because of his crazy stats. And you wonder, like, what is he meant to represent? Eventually you start to understand that he represents manifest destiny. So one of the interesting things he does many things in the book. One of the interesting things that he does is he catalogs things. He finds artifacts, he finds cave paintings, and he makes notes. He draws sketches in a little notebook that he has, and then he destroys the artifacts. And he wipes away the cave paintings and whatever else he finds. I think he finds like fucking dinosaur bones at some point. So yeah, that's kind of meant to represent the, you know, cultural erasure of manifest destiny. He also goes on like really deep philosophy monologues, and there's many YouTube videos on the things he says. You can check them out on YouTube. I haven't really watched them, but they're quite long and seemingly extensive. But what interests me is his final monologue. So I'm not going to go into any spoiler territory, but he starts talking to the main character, the kid, about war, kind of. And this is like their whole, I'm not going to get into spoilers, this is at the point in the book where their whole journey is done. Basically, the book is done. And obviously this is not a spoiler, they kill a lot of people, a lot of violence happens in this book. So he starts talking to the kid about, you know, warriors and war. And then he says basically that, you know, war is kind of analogous to dancing, and that when you're dancing, everyone is kind of drawn into the dance. Like when you're on a dance floor, when you're in that environment, like say you're in, and this is in like a kind of salon where there's people dancing, you know, people are going to be drawn into the dance. So he says war is kind of like that. He's saying that the Wild West is kind of like that for war. Everyone is just drawn into this conflict, and that war is something inevitable and it's something part of human nature that will always happen, and the one who is the strongest will win and overpower the weaker person. And I feel like that's true. I agree with that message at a deep level. And I feel like that it does make sense. Like, that is kind of why Manifest Destiny happened. Unfortunately, nations are not very charitable. They'll often do whatever they can to forward the interests of their own nation at the expense of other nations. But in the context of this book, it feels like a justification. And yeah, if you go on Instagram, you go on any Native American content creator, you'll see many comments that have a similar message to this. So you'll see things like, oh, next time invent guns, we won, get over it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. So yeah, basically that summarizes my thoughts on Blood Meridian. I think it's a very good book. I think that most people would enjoy it. It's a bit hard to read because of his very interesting writing style and prose. But, you know, whoever wants to read it should read it. But I feel like feeling the need to justify reading it as it being anti-racist is just not true. It doesn't really perpetuate any positive message when it comes to the damage that the Western genre has done to a lot of people's perceptions of that historical period in time. If anything, it is a member of that genre. It doesn't really subvert things besides exaggerating them. So yeah.